Recognize this building? It's the old Herbig Bakery, now the headquarters of the Bradford Landmark Society. And believe me, I know this building well because I've been walking through that front door now for 26 years and hope to continue to keep walking for many more. Join us with Coffee with the Curator as we look at the history of the Herbig Bakery. This is the oldest known photograph of the Herbig Bakery that the Bradford Landmark Society has. We think it was taken about 1892. Back then it was called the French Bakery, and you can see those words on the side of the delivery wagon as it comes out the alley. We believe the building was probably built about 1876, which makes it the oldest continuously operating frame building in the historic district of Bradford. It was well known as a bakery for over 80 years. The building and the business was founded by a man named Celeste Gall. Now that's French, but it's also German. He was born in Alsace-Lorraine in France, which is right on the German border. And throughout his life, the census records alternately show him as being born in France or being born in Germany. He apparently spoke both quite fluently. Here's a photograph of Celeste Gall, taken shortly after he opened the bakery. He was 23 years old when he formed the French bakery. The bakery was very successful. It delivered bread and pastries to all the hotels in town. And since this is the beginning of the oil boom, there were quite a few hotels. He had a wife, Madeline, and over the next couple of years they had 5 children: Lena, George, Alphonse, Joseph, and Naomi. Quite a crowd. Of course, he had people to help him too, and one of them was a man named Gus Herbig, a German immigrant who had been born in 1865. Gus immigrated to the United States in 1879 and found a job at the French bakery. This is an enlargement of that original picture that shows the outside of the Herbig Bakery, showing Celeste Gall, his neighbor Jake Heckel, who's the butcher next door, and who we believe is Gus Herbig standing in the doorway. The woman with the baby carriage is very likely Maggie Herbig. And although we can't be certain, the 3 little boys standing next to Celeste Gall are probably George, Alphonse, and Joseph. And the little girl with her arm around the dog would be Naomi. She is 3 years old in 1892. Why do we think this is 1892? Well, that's when Gus Herbig and his wife bought the bakery from Celeste Gall. Celeste Gall and his family moved up to Buffalo. But sadly, just a few months later, Celeste Gall's wife, Madeline, dies in childbirth. And the child, a little girl named Rose Elizabeth, died a few days later. Both were returned to Bradford and are buried in St. Bernard Cemetery. It was said that Celeste Gall was prostrate with grief, and he and his oldest daughter, Lena, who was about 20 years old at the time, went back to Buffalo. This is a photograph of Celeste Gall in later years, just before he died. He died in Buffalo on April 1st, 1929, and is buried in the United Germany and France Cemetery in Cheektowaga, New York. As the new owner of the French bakery, Gus Herbig kept the name for years, although eventually it became known as the Herbig Bakery. In 1903, the New York Register wrote, "The premises occupied is spacious, commodious, and thoroughly equipped, and several men are employed, while the proprietor, Mr. Herbig, personally exercises close supervision over the establishment. All kinds of family and hotel bread, rolls, buns, pies, plain and fancy cakes, cookies, etc., are baked fresh every day from the best flour and other ingredients procurable. All orders are promptly filled and delivered free to any part of the city." This is Margaret Herbig, Gus's wife. She was a partner in the business and worked just as hard as he did. At one point, she ran a small sandwich shop restaurant in the front of the store, while her husband baked bread in the back. She died in 1912 and is buried in Oak Hill Cemetery. Gus Herbig was also community minded. He was also a member of the Johnson Hose Fire Company. Here is a photograph of Gus Herbig in his fireman uniform, taken about 1900. He also sponsored a bowling team in the city and called it the Herbig Buns. He was elected the county inspector for bakeries in McKean County in 1918. And at that same time, he was providing the bread and butter for the city lockup. Yeah, that's all they fed those prisoners was bread and butter. For 9 cents for a 1-pound buttered loaf. And in 1919, in August, he promised to pay for the lighting of the Victory Arch over Main Street if his son Harry Herbig returned safely from World War I. Harry did, and so did Gus Herbig. If you were alive in 1900, you would have seen this delivery wagon delivering bread and rolls to the various places in town. It's still called the French Bakery, but the name Gus Herbig is prominently displayed on the wagon. Gus Herbig was a baker his whole life. He lived to be 74 years old, dying on the eve of his birthday on February 15th of 1939. Gus lived upstairs over the bakery, and his son Harry Herbig found him there. Gus Herbig had died of a heart attack, and here at the landmark, we go upstairs every February 15th and hope to channel the spirit of Gus Herbig, but we've never been successful. Gus Herbig was survived by his son, Harry Herbig, and 2 daughters, Mrs. H.W. Loveland and Mrs. P.M. Mays of Bradford, and 3 grandchildren, Mrs. Virginia Loveland Miles and William Loveland of Bradford, and Marjorie Mays of Boston, and a great-granddaughter, Madeline Miles, and a sister, Mrs. Catherine Krieg of Hudson, New York. The bakery continued, of course, with his son Harry Herbig, and later his granddaughter, Virginia Loveland Miles, who became as well known as Gus Herbig himself, and she operated the bakery for many years until the 1960s. When she retired from the business, the bakery building remained vacant for several years. But by 1965, Freddy's Bakery and Pizza Shop moved in. By 1968, the building was vacant again. And in May of 1969, the Bradford Landmark Society was formed, and Mrs. Miles gave her permission for the use of the building to the society for the next 2 years. Eventually, it was just given over to the society, and we've been here ever since. And occasionally, people still stop in and ask us for fresh bread. And even though we don't bake bread here anymore, the Bradford Landmark Society is proud to exist in one of the oldest wooden buildings in the city. And it kind of makes sense. A historical society in a historic building.